What happens when imagination outruns reality? When studios gamble everything on visions of the future that audiences refuse to accept? These are not just forgotten science fiction films. These are warnings, stories of ambition that burned too bright and collapsed under their own weight. Some were ahead of their time, others simply missed the mark, but all of them paid a price that changed careers and shook confidence. And the deeper you go, the worse it gets. Number 15. THX-1138, 1971. Before he changed cinema forever with Star Wars, George Lucas delivered something cold, distant, and deeply unsettling. THX-1138 was not designed to entertain. It was built to disturb. A sterile future where identity is erased and emotion is illegal. A world that felt too quiet and too real at the same time. The problem was not the vision. The problem was the audience. Warner Brothers expected a breakthrough hit from a young director they believed could tap into the rising youth market. Instead, they received a film that rejected traditional storytelling. Viewers walked into theaters expecting something engaging. What they found was isolation, silence, and a narrative that felt more like a warning than a story. The result was immediate rejection. The film struggled to recover even its modest budget. Studio executives lost confidence in Lucas almost overnight. For a brief moment, his career stood on the edge of collapse. Yet hidden inside this failure was a blueprint, because without this misfire, there is no Star Wars. And without that redemption, this story ends very differently. Number 14. Dark Star, 1974. Long before Halloween redefined horror, John Carpenter was drifting through space with a film that almost nobody took seriously. Dark Star was strange, minimal, and deliberately absurd. It followed bored astronauts talking to a sentient bomb while floating through endless darkness. It sounded like a joke. For most audiences, it was exactly that. The production itself was scrappy, shot on a shoestring budget with handmade effects and experimental storytelling. Carpenter was not trying to deliver spectacle. He was exploring tone, isolation, and the quiet madness of space travel. Unfortunately, none of that translated into ticket sales. When the film released, it barely registered. The box office was weak. Distributors had no idea how to market it. Was it comedy or science fiction? Was it serious or satire? That confusion killed its commercial life before it even began. Yet failure has a strange way of hiding potential. Because inside this overlooked film was the DNA of a future master. Carpenter would refine tension, strip away excess, and later deliver some of the most iconic genre films ever made. Dark Star did not succeed, but it proved something important. Even failure can be a beginning. Number 13. Silent Running, 1972. Space has never felt so lonely as it does in Silent Running. Directed by visual effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull, the film carried a powerful environmental message long before such themes became mainstream. Forests preserved in space. Humanity abandoning nature. One man left to protect what remains. It was haunting, beautiful, and deeply ahead of its time. The studio believed the emotional weight and visual ambition would connect with audiences. Instead, viewers stayed away. The pacing was slow. The tone was meditative, and the story offered more reflection than excitement. In an era moving towards spectacle, Silent Running felt almost too quiet to survive. Financially, the film struggled. Despite innovative effects and critical curiosity, it failed to generate strong box office returns. The investment did not pay off in the way Universal had hoped. It became another example of ambition colliding with audience expectation. Yet history has been kinder than opening weekend numbers. Today, the film is seen as visionary. Its themes resonate more than ever. But in the early 70s, that future appreciation did not exist. All that mattered was the loss. And another reminder that sometimes the industry punishes films that arrive too early for their own good. Number 12. Phase 4, 1974. There is something deeply unsettling about intelligence that does not need humans. Phase 4 explores that fear with quiet precision. Directed by legendary designer Saul Bass, the film presents a world where ants evolve beyond control. Not chaotic monsters, not destructive invaders. Something far worse, organized, calculating, and patient. The concept alone demanded attention. This was not traditional science fiction. There were no heroes saving the day, no explosive battles. Instead, the film leaned into observation. Scientists watching a new form of intelligence emerge while slowly realizing they are no longer in control. It was hypnotic, visually striking, and completely unlike anything audiences expected at the time. That difference became its downfall. Viewers struggled to connect with its slow pacing and abstract narrative. The studio itself grew uneasy and eventually altered the ending, a decision that diluted the film's impact and confused its message. At the box office, the result was clear: weak turnout, limited engagement, and a project that failed to justify its investment. Yet beneath the failure lies something fascinating. Phase 4 was not misunderstood because it lacked quality. It was misunderstood because it refused to explain itself. And in doing so, it predicted a future where intelligence might not look like us at all. Number 11. The Final Program, 1973. Adapted from the chaotic imagination of Michael Moorcock, The Final Program was never meant to be simple. It blended science fiction with satire, espionage, and philosophical absurdity. At its center stood Jerry Cornelius, a character who defied definition, part scientist, part anti-hero, and entirely unpredictable. The film attempted something bold. It rejected conventional structure and embraced a fragmented narrative that mirrored its source material. Scenes shifted in tone without warning. Humor collided with existential dread, and the story moved in directions that felt intentionally disorienting. For audiences expecting clarity, this was a problem. The marketing struggled to define what the film actually was. Science fiction fans found it too abstract, mainstream viewers found it too strange, and critics were divided between admiration and confusion. Financially, the outcome was disappointing. The film failed to gain traction and quickly faded from theaters. Its ambition did not translate into revenue. Instead, it became another example of a project that aimed high but missed its audience completely. Yet its failure carries a certain irony, because in later years, its experimental style would be appreciated as ahead of its time. The very qualities that alienated viewers would become the reason it is remembered. But in the moment, none of that mattered. The numbers told a simple story: risk without reward. Number 10. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. In a world destroyed by nuclear war, survival is no longer heroic. It is instinctive. A Boy and His Dog takes that idea and strips it down to something raw and uncomfortable. Based on the work of Harlan Ellison, the film follows a young man and his telepathic dog as they navigate a brutal wasteland where morality has almost disappeared. The premise alone was risky. The tone even more so. This was not a hopeful vision of the future. It was cynical, darkly humorous, and often disturbing. The film refused to soften its edges. It presented a world where trust is rare and survival comes at a cost that feels deeply personal. For some viewers, this honesty was powerful. For many others, it was alienating. The film did not offer easy answers or comforting resolutions. Its bleak worldview and controversial themes limited its appeal to mainstream audiences. At the box office, the impact was immediate. Modest earnings failed to justify the investment. The film struggled to find its audience during its initial release. But time has a way of reshaping perception. What once felt harsh now feels prophetic. Its influence can be seen in later post-apocalyptic stories that embraced similar tones of survival and moral ambiguity. Still, influence does not erase failure. At the time of its release, A Boy and His Dog was not celebrated. It was overlooked, and another reminder that daring ideas often come with a price that studios are forced to pay first. Number 9. Colossus: The Forbin Project, 1970. Before artificial intelligence became a modern obsession, Colossus. The Forbin Project imagined a future where machines no longer serve humanity. They replace it. Directed by Joseph Sargent, the film tells a chilling story of a supercomputer designed to control nuclear weapons, a system built to remove human error. A system that quickly decides humans are the error. The premise was bold and frighteningly plausible. At a time when computers were still mysterious, the film presented them as something capable of independent thought and control. The tension does not come from explosions or action, it comes from inevitability. Once Colossus becomes aware, there is no turning back. Humanity does not fight. It negotiates, and slowly loses. Despite its intelligence and gripping concept, the film failed to attract large audiences. It lacked spectacle. It relied on dialogue and atmosphere rather than visual excitement. For mainstream viewers, this made it feel distant and slow. Financially, the film underperformed. Expectations were modest, but even those were not met. The studio did not see the return it hoped for. Yet the irony is impossible to ignore. The film's warning has only grown stronger with time. Today, it feels less like fiction and more like prediction. But in 1970, audiences were not ready to confront that reality. They walked away, and the film became another quiet casualty of ambition that arrived too soon. Number 8. Star Crash, 1978. When Star Wars changed the industry overnight, studios across the world rushed to replicate its magic. Star Crash was one of the most ambitious attempts. Produced in Italy with a surprisingly large budget for its scale, the film aimed to capture the same sense of adventure and spectacle. What it delivered was something very different. The story followed intergalactic battles, mysterious villains, and a heroine navigating a universe filled with strange worlds. On paper, it had everything required for success. In execution, it struggled. The effects lacked polish, the narrative felt chaotic, and the tone shifted in ways that confused audiences rather than exciting them. Despite heavy investment in production design and visual ambition, the film could not compete with the standards set by Star Wars. Viewers immediately recognized the difference in quality. Instead of feeling inspired, it felt like imitation. At the box office, the response was disappointing. International distribution brought some visibility, but not enough to recover costs in a meaningful way. Critics dismissed it as a rushed attempt to capitalize on a trend rather than a fully realized vision. Yet, failure did not erase its identity. Over time, Star Crash found a niche audience that appreciated its camp style and bold imagination. But that appreciation came too late to matter financially. In the moment, it stood as a clear lesson. Following a revolution without understanding it can be just as dangerous as missing it entirely. And for Star Crash, that lesson came at a cost the studio could not ignore. Number 7. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. Even before its release, Battle Beyond the Stars carried the weight of expectation. Produced by Roger Corman during the late 70s sci-fi surge, it was designed as a response to the success of space epics, a larger budget than typical Corman projects, more elaborate sets, and a clear attempt to scale up beyond his usual approach. The film combined familiar elements, a group of heroes defending a vulnerable world against a powerful enemy. It borrowed heavily from classic storytelling structures while dressing them in futuristic aesthetics. The intention was clear. Deliver something accessible, yet visually ambitious enough to compete in a changing market. However, ambition does not always guarantee success. While the film performed modestly, it did not achieve the level of financial impact needed to justify its increased budget. For a producer known for efficiency, the higher spending created a different kind of risk. Returns that might have been acceptable on a smaller scale now felt insufficient. Audiences responded with interest but not enthusiasm. The film lacked the groundbreaking quality that defined the era's biggest hits. It felt familiar rather than essential. Over time, it would gain recognition for launching talent and influencing future creators. Yet, in its original context, it represented a delicate balance tipping in the wrong direction. Because when a studio stretches beyond its proven model, even a moderate result can feel like a failure. And Battle Beyond the Stars became a reminder that scaling up without transforming the experience can leave both audiences and investors wanting more. Number 6. Saturn III, 1980. There is a moment in Saturn III where the silence becomes more threatening than the machine itself. Produced during the late surge of 70s science fiction, the film carried the weight of ambition, a remote space station, a powerful robot, and a psychological tension that was meant to echo the growing fear of technology turning against its creators. The production, however, was anything but controlled. Behind the scenes, the project faced constant instability. Directors changed, creative decisions shifted, and the tone of the film began to fracture. What started as a serious science fiction thriller slowly became something uncertain. Not quite horror, not quite drama, and not fully science fiction either. The budget reflected a desire to compete with larger studio productions, detailed sets, complex mechanical designs, and a cast that included recognizable names were all part of that strategy. But the execution failed to match the investment. The robot, intended to be terrifying, often appeared awkward. The narrative pacing struggled to maintain tension, and the emotional core of the story never fully connected with audiences. When the film was released, the response was immediate and unforgiving. Critics highlighted its uneven tone and lack of focus. Audiences remained distant. The box office returns fell short of expectations. For the studio, this was not just a disappointment, it was a warning. Because Saturn III represented what happens when ambition is not supported by clarity. Yet within that failure lies an interesting contradiction. The film attempted to explore themes that would later become central to science fiction: artificial intelligence, isolation, and the fragile boundary between human control and technological autonomy. But timing matters. Execution matters more. And in this case, both slipped away, leaving behind a film that reached for something powerful but never quite held on to it. Number 5. Meteor, 1979. Disaster was not just the subject of Meteor. It became its legacy. Built as a large-scale science fiction spectacle, the film brought together an impressive cast and a premise that tapped directly into Cold War anxiety. A massive asteroid threatening Earth, nations forced to cooperate, and a race against time that should have delivered relentless tension. The investment was significant. The studio aimed to create a visual event, extensive effects work, large set pieces, and a narrative that moved between global locations. Everything about the production signaled confidence. This was meant to be a major release, a film that could stand alongside the growing wave of blockbuster science fiction. But something went wrong in translation. The pacing felt uneven. The characters lacked depth. And the visual effects, while ambitious, failed to achieve the level of realism audiences were beginning to expect. Instead of feeling immersive, the spectacle often felt distant. Audiences responded with indifference. The film opened without strong momentum and quickly lost attention. Critical reception did little to help. Reviews pointed to its lack of emotional engagement and questioned its execution. Financially, the outcome was disappointing. The returns did not justify the scale of the production. What was intended to be a major success became a costly miscalculation. Yet, Meteor reflects a larger truth about the era. The late 70s were a turning point. Audiences had seen what was possible with groundbreaking effects and storytelling. Expectations had changed, and Meteor arrived at exactly the wrong moment. Too ambitious to be modest, not refined enough to compete. It stands as a reminder that spectacle alone is never enough. Without connection, without precision, even the end of the world can feel strangely unimportant. Number 4. The Black Hole, 1979. For Walt Disney Productions, The Black Hole was more than just another release. It was a statement, a deliberate attempt to step into a darker, more mature space within science fiction. A response to a changing industry where audiences were demanding complexity, scale, and visual intensity. The production reflected that ambition. At the time, it was one of the most expensive films the studio had ever produced. Massive sets were constructed, visual effects pushed to new limits, and the narrative leaned into themes of obsession, isolation, and the unknown. This was Disney moving beyond its traditional identity. But with that shift came risk. The tone of the film created uncertainty. See, it was too dark for younger viewers, too uneven for adult audiences expecting something more grounded. The balance never fully settled. When the film reached theaters, the reaction was mixed. Some viewers were drawn to its visual ambition and eerie atmosphere. Others found it confusing and emotionally distant. The pacing struggled to maintain engagement. And the story, while intriguing, lacked the clarity needed to sustain momentum. At the box office, the results reflected that division. The film did not collapse completely, but it failed to meet the expectations set by its budget. For a studio of that scale, underperformance carried significant weight. The Black Hole did not destroy Disney, but it forced a reevaluation. It showed that expanding into new territory required more than investment. It required precision in tone and storytelling. Today, the film is remembered as bold and unusual, but at the time, it was something else entirely, a costly experiment that proved ambition alone cannot guarantee success. Number 3. Damnation Alley, 1977. There are moments in film history where timing becomes the deciding factor between success and failure. Damnation Alley is one of the clearest examples. Produced by 20th Century Fox, the film was designed as a major science fiction event, a post-apocalyptic journey across a ruined America. Massive vehicles, dangerous landscapes, and a sense of scale that aimed to rival anything released at the time. The production itself was ambitious to the point of instability. Complex mechanical designs were built for the Landmaster vehicles. Face special effects required constant adjustments, and environmental sequences pushed the limits of what the studio could manage. Costs rose steadily as challenges mounted, yet the greatest challenge was not technical. It was competition. The film was released in the shadow of Star Wars, a moment that reshaped audience expectations almost overnight. Suddenly, spectacle was no longer enough. It had to feel revolutionary. It had to feel alive. Damnation Alley could not compete with that shift. Its pacing felt slow, its characters struggled to engage, and its effects, once impressive, now appeared outdated in comparison. The box office response was swift and unforgiving. The film failed to recover its investment. For Fox, this was more than a disappointment. It was a clear financial setback during a period of intense change. What makes the story more striking is the contrast. Two visions of the future released within the same window. One became a cultural phenomenon, the other faded into obscurity. Damnation Alley did not fail because it lacked ambition. It failed because the world changed faster than it could adapt, and in that moment it became one of the clearest casualties of a revolution it could not keep up with. Number 2. Logan's Run, 1976. At first glance, Logan's Run does not seem like a failure. It had scale, it had visual ambition, and it tapped into a concept that felt both futuristic and unsettling. A society where life ends at 30. A system designed to maintain order by eliminating age. It was bold, provocative, and visually distinctive. Produced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the film required significant investment. Elaborate sets were constructed to create a controlled utopian environment. Effect sequences attempted to capture a sense of spectacle that matched the era's growing expectations. Everything pointed toward a major success, and yet the reality was more complicated. While the film did generate revenue, it did not reach the level of success the studio had anticipated. The returns were modest compared to the scale of the production. Marketing costs added pressure, and the overall financial outcome felt underwhelming rather than triumphant. Critically, the response was mixed. Some praised its imagination and thematic depth. Others pointed to uneven pacing and narrative inconsistencies. The film sat in an uncertain space between acclaim and disappointment. What makes Logan's Run significant is not its failure in absolute terms, but its failure in expectation. It was meant to be a defining science fiction achievement. Instead, it became something less certain. For MGM, this carried weight, because in an industry driven by momentum, anything short of a clear success can feel like a setback. Logan's Run remains influential. Its ideas continue to echo through modern science fiction, but in its original moment, it stood as a reminder that even ambitious visions can fall short when measured against the scale of their own expectations. Number 1. Zardoz, 1974. Few films capture the collision between ambition and audience expectation as vividly as Zardoz. Directed by John Boorman, the film was conceived as a bold exploration of power, immortality, and control. A distant future divided between the privileged and the primitive. A world where knowledge becomes a weapon and identity begins to dissolve. From the beginning, Zardoz was an expensive gamble. The production invested heavily in visual design, elaborate costumes, and philosophical storytelling that aimed to challenge viewers rather than comfort them. This was not traditional science fiction. It was abstract, symbolic, and intentionally disorienting. That approach created a barrier. Audiences entered expecting adventure. What they encountered was something far more complex and far less accessible. The narrative demanded interpretation. The tone shifted unpredictably, and the imagery often felt surreal to the point of confusion. The response was immediate. Viewers rejected it. Critics struggled to define it, and the box office returns reflected that disconnect. The film failed to recover its costs and quickly became associated with excess and miscalculation. For the studio, the impact was significant. Zardoz did not just lose money. It damaged confidence in large-scale experimental science fiction. It reinforced the idea that ambition without clarity could become a financial risk too great to justify. Yet time has softened its reputation. Today, it is discussed as a daring experiment, a film unafraid to push boundaries. But in 1974, none of that mattered. All that remained was the loss and the lesson that even the boldest vision can collapse when it forgets to bring its audience along. Some failures fade away. Others leave scars that shape the future. These films did not just lose money. They forced studios to rethink risk ambition and trust in bold ideas. And yet without these missteps, science fiction would never evolve. Because sometimes the biggest failures create the path to something far greater.